Sunwell will not fall!
As midnight descends and the last Titan looms, we caught up with World of Warcraft game director Ian Hazzikostas to chat about housing, add-ons, and the future of World of Warcraft. But there was one question on our minds. Why should you play World of Warcraft in 2026? That's what we were there to find out. Amazing. Well, Ian, I think we might have spoken before. I'm not 100% sure.
I believe so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we have. Well, it's lovely to speak to you again. And yeah, let's just start, not at the beginning, like the very beginning. Let's start at the beginning of Midnight, right?
Sure.
Midnight's out. Congratulations. What was it kind of like, you know, with the launch? Are you happy with it? Was there anything that you probably would have done differently? What's it kind of like now that the dust is settled, looking back on that?
Overall, we're really happy. You know, I'm very proud of the team's hard work and what they pulled off in kind of crafting and delivering the second chapter of the World Soul Saga. I think it was really exciting to return to the lands of Quel'Thalas, to return to Silvermoon and Zulaman and the like, and to see players' enthusiasm for kind of returning to some iconic locations that we visited in the past, back in the Burning Crusade days. I think that was something that was a little bit of a question mark, like a little bit of a slight doubt or concern on the team's part, whether the community would embrace returning to familiar locations reimagined, or whether they would see it as like, oh, this is just rehashing old stuff. We've already been there. And I think we're very excited to see them embrace it, because it opens so many doors in terms of our ability to revisit and update and reimagine, of course, iconic locations that are so central to World of Warcraft's history, to the world of Azeroth, and be able to tell new stories in them. I think, Midnight has continued to kind of broaden and deepen the range of options and play styles that are available in modern World of Warcraft. I think we added delves in War Within, which were, an amazing new feature for solo players or small groups of friends who, were looking for more progression, were looking for more of that dungeon crawling feel, but didn't necessarily want to join large 5-player groups to do it. We've continued to refine that system, but we, continue to even more deeply serve sort of solo and outdoor-oriented players with new systems like Prey, adding a new layer of engagement and interactivity and challenge on the outdoor world experience. And of course, who can forget housing and this whole new progression track and self-expression ecosystem that is really just laying a foundation that we're excited to keep building on for years to come. I think the story of modern World of Warcraft for many years now, I think really has been about broadening our approach to try to offer something for all the different types of player that have decided to make Azeroth their home. And, I think Midnight takes that to an all new level, and we're very proud of what we've been able to deliver and are excited about, continuing to update this expansion and beyond.
Yeah, I think it is really interesting because Midnight in some ways feels like a lot like a crossroads, because like you say, it kind of feels like it harkens back to OG World of Warcraft, while like you say, adding all of these new kind of features. Is that something that you would agree with, that Midnight feels like a kind of mixture of old WoW meets new WoW?
I mean, we're about to head into a troll raid and a troll patch. And so, the more things change, the more they stay the same, apparently. I think certainly, right, there's a return to familiar locations, familiar themes, but a modern approach, both, in the fidelity of how the experience is expressed visually, but also in the approachability and flexibility of the gameplay itself.
Yeah, and I think obviously with Midnight, it has been, let's be real, a bit of a kind of up and down kind of development here. Obviously, the launch was great, but there's been a few bugs along the way. Mm-hmm. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you've dealt with that, how the team has approached that, and then how you're gonna, kind of not squash all of them? I think that's an impossibility, but how we're approaching that going forward.
Yes, definitely. I think it's no secret, as you allude to, the 12.05, our first content update, was not the smoothest release, to say the least. I think while we got the experience to a pretty stable place within a few days, there were more bugs at launch than we find acceptable. To some extent, given the sheer breadth of WoW, some number of bugs are inevitable. I think anyone who's worked on a large project is familiar with concepts like tech debt and just the way, you poke at one piece of the code and something breaks, in a far off location. But at the end of the day, our players aren't interested in the intricacies of maintaining a 20-year-old game. They want a good, polished experience. And so, I think a lot of what contributed to 1205 and the way it played out was actually aspects of our internal processes actually involving fixing bugs, where I think we were fixing bugs too late in the process in ways that made it nearly impossible for ourselves and our quality assurance analysts to catch some knock-on effects from those fixes. Just to give a specific example, one of the most visible issues at the launch of 1205 was that we had to disable housing for a whole day, the entire housing system. Now, why did we do that? Well, actually, what happened was we discovered in our internal checks that if you anyone who zoned into their house would instantly have any decor that was not on the ground snap to the ground and save that way in a way that was going to be destructive of whatever placement people had. Obviously, major issue. It wasn't something we could fix right away, but we didn't want to hold the entire game down just for that, so we disabled housing. Well, how does that happen? One might very reasonably ask, how does that bug sneak into the system so late? Did we not test it? Did we not have people checking housing? Of course we did. Of course we had, a thorough suite of tests run on the whole housing system. But there was another tricky bug that got caught late in the process that actually involved, of all things, the elevator in the Siege of Orgrimmar raid for Mists of Pandaria, which suddenly was broken and players weren't properly attaching to it. Turns out that was broken by some earlier fixes to housing code involving attaching objects to other objects. A fix was done to the Siege of Orgrimmar elevator very late in the process, like a few days before the patch was about to go live. QA checked it. The elevator worked perfectly fine. We did not, at the time, go back to recheck housing. And fix to one bug caused an issue elsewhere. And I know I could cue all the spaghetti code memes that I know the internet will come up with, but sometimes, game development is very much a set of moving targets. And so while, we're always going to do our best to avoid issues like this in the first place, I think this made us take a look at our processes and draw some bright lines where we'll say, once we're this far along, once we have our final release candidate, once we're in final checks, we're only going to do absolutely critical bug fixes because of the risk that has to the stability of the product. That's not to say that we're not going to hot fix things once we're live. We're constantly rolling out fixes and updates to the service, but that risk of doing something that messes up a release isn't something that really is fair for us to take. And so that's one example of, I think, how we're tightening up our processes. It's not to say that, we may not make mistakes in the future, but hopefully there'll be different ones, which is always the goal. And I think we've seen, with the 1207 release that just came out, in the last couple of weeks, I think that's been a much smoother rollout. And I think that's reflective of how we want this to go going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that because it does take aim at a few of the kind of bigger things that were causing some problems. And it certainly feels like 12.1 is doing the same type of thing. It's very heavy on its kind of quality of life fixes. So Can you chat to me a little bit about that decision? It's obviously got its own content coming with it, raids and things, right? But how do you balance kind of adding new stuff to the game while also making sure that the foundations of the game are super, super solid?
Yeah, I think in practice, part of how that plays out is us, pre-planning a lot of our major features and systems and content. We have known that we were going, to this mysterious isle off the coast of Zulaman for some time. We've known that this was going to, the raid was going to be what it was. We've been working on that for a long time. But we also keep a portion of our resources and our bandwidth free to be reactive, to listen to the things that players are telling us right as we launch Midnight, let's say, and to try to focus on addressing pain points, improving quality of life, fixing bugs when they crop up, and sort of everything in between. And so while, pre-planned development on something like, the Curse of Ulatek and the major content update has been continuing for a while, we're able to, with a bit more agility, address things like improving performance in Silvermoon or, stomping a persistent bug that would make AoE looting or auto looting fail sometimes, much to the irritation of many, many players, and things like that. Some things we're able to just hotfix in real time. Others require, a bit more planning, like fixing aspects of the user interface or the auction house or what have you. But we're excited to continue improving that baseline experience as we add new goals to reach for and new adventures to jump into.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is really interesting is that Silver Moon one, right? Because it was such an interesting bug in that it made World of Warcraft feel a little bit smaller, right? And that was such a weird thing to see. So with something like that, how do you kind of prioritize what ones to hit and what ones to not hit, basically?
That's a great question. It's a mix of factors. I think it's the severity of the impact of the issue, the number of people that it's affecting, and also, frankly, the cost to fix. And I mean cost in terms of the risk and the number of hours of developers that will be involved, because sometimes, some issue might seem important, but the time it might take to fix it could be used to fix 10 other issues that combined would have a far greater net impact on players' experience. So it's always this kind of balancing act. Something like, yes, Silver Moon, it is a vast and wondrous city, but it definitely pushed the limits of client performance initially that made us, have to throttle the number of players that could be in Silver Moon at one time. Because, as beautiful as the city is, if you're experiencing it as a slideshow, that's not great or acceptable. But as you note, some of that just cuts against the feel that you're looking for in an MMO. Like, you're in the capital city of the current expansion. It should feel vibrant and bustling and like there's players everywhere. And so it was something that we noticed really early on of like, even if people aren't objectively, even if they're not like complaining about this and starting threads on the forums, on Reddit or whatever about how empty Silver Moon feels, all of us on the dev team could feel it. Like, this isn't what the city should feel like. We need to prioritize addressing this issue, getting more people in there so that, your sessions of midnight begin and end in a place where you feel surrounded by players.
Yeah, and obviously one of the big things that is coming with the next patch is the kind of reduction in decor costs, right? Which I'm sure a lot of housing enthusiasts are going to be super duper excited about. So can you talk to me a little bit about that, why you guys have chosen to do that now? Was that in relation to community feedback? Like, what was the decision-making process there?
Yeah, I think it definitely informed by community feedback and seeing behavior in practice, and how long it was taking people to accrue the different currencies to get the decor they wanted. I think we're trying to strike a balance, right? We want this to be a meaningful, progression, something that people can really, dig into as they revisit old locations, as they go through new content to earn the decor that they want. But if at the end of the day you feel like it's too tedious or you can't get enough of the things that you want to realize the build that you're chasing, that's going to just undermine your enjoyment in the whole system. And as we often do, and I think we are at times very fairly criticized by the community for this, when building a system like this that has to stand the test of time, we tend to start on the conservative side because if we overshoot as we did, it's not that challenging to lower the prices, and that's how they'll be going forward. Whereas we know that if we came in too low, we really couldn't justify raising the prices of the decor, and we want to make sure that there's enough depth to the system to really make the time people spend and to the differentiation in the decor collections people have something that has some substance to it.
Yeah, so side question, not relevant to any of this, but slightly, still relevant, but slightly relevant.
Yeah.
I asked a couple of your colleagues a few months ago what their favourite things are that they've seen in housing. Maria told me that someone made a Xalatath feet shrine that she particularly, I'm going to say enjoyed, but not in that way. And so what are some of the most interesting housing designs you've seen so far? And how were these the reduction in decor costs allow players to do even more crazy things?
I think there isn't like a single one that jumps to mind for me. Most of my favorites, I think, are the ones that are fantastical and playing with gravity, like upside down rooms, things with floating platforms, the floating houses across neighborhoods. And I think really that's a testament to the flexibility and the kind of the rule breaking freedom that players are afforded when it comes to how they want their houses to look. I think it was something that was really exciting to see our art leadership actually embrace early on in the housing design process. I think often, the player's desire for creativity and silliness runs into art direction's very reasonable desire for a grounded, consistent world. But I think the people making the housing system are people who played with housing systems in a wide variety of other games. And one of the universal constants there was players, whatever rules you put in place, players will try to break them, will find loopholes. And so, let's just lean into that. Let's embrace it from the start rather than players figuring out some convoluted way to get a floating table in a room. Let's just let them make it float if they want to, and we'll see what they do with it. And so when you have a system that has so few constraints, I think just giving people access to more decor just inherently ramps up the combinations, the combinatorics of the wild ways in which people will be able to express their imaginations. And just can't wait to see how the whole ecosystem continues to evolve.
Yeah, there have been some wild ones. Like, I've seen some wild ones. I'm not creative enough for that, for real. I'll just be honest. I'm not clever enough for this. But there have been some wild ones. But I don't have a good segue into the next question, so we're just going sideways. Whoops.
All right, let's go.
So obviously with this patch as well, there is the progression reset, which is a really, really interesting choice. So I just want to ask, obviously, why now? And what kind of prompted that decision there?
So you mean the ability to reset a profession that you've? Okay. Yes. I think we there are at least once in the past we've done this as a one-time reset mid expansion. I think a challenge with the profession system is like we want the choices players make to be meaningful and to help them differentiate themselves from other crafters. There are very, 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 very few choices, especially in a progression space, that you can make in WoW today that aren't freely resettable and swappable, right? Like you can move your talents, your spec, all those things around very freely. But with professions, because of like the macroeconomic, community here, it's important that there be some people who are better at making this type of craft versus others who are better at making that type of craft, which helps, have people have niches where they can, make and sell things at a profit. And you want to seek out a crafter who's best at making this thing versus, the other end of the spectrum. If you could respec freely with no restrictions, we could always just respec to be the best at making the thing you wanted to craft in the moment. And so complete flexibility wouldn't really work. It would undermine a lot of the goals of the system. But we've been hearing from players that as they've seen itemization evolve, as their understanding of the ecosystem has sharpened, maybe that they regret the choices they made early on in Midnight. And so we want to give everybody a chance to reallocate their points, knowing what they know now. But from there, it still will be locked for the rest of the expansion, and how you spend those points this time around needs to be a meaningful choice. But now players, I think, with full information, can hopefully make a choice they're going to be more satisfied with for the remainder of Midnight.
Yeah, and obviously these type of systems are probably the hardest to balance, right? Because like you say, they've got that kind of wider macroeconomic, for want of a better term, effect on the game. So how do you go about making changes like this? Because they are so big. And where do you kind of choose to draw the line, like you say, and that we can't just make it fully like, just swap everything around, while also making sure that you don't have too heavy an impact on the player base?
I mean, it's an equal mix of objective data about what players are actually doing, how they're using the system, what choices they're making. The feedback we're getting from all sources, from forums, Reddit, social media, from people within the team who come in on Mondays and have their grumbles and complaints about their own experiences playing over the weekend, and then our own design goals and philosophies, which we're also always making sure to kind of revisit and check to make sure that they're still the correct ones and still hold up in light of what we are learning from our players' preferences and their behavior. But in the case of professions, I think it's an evolving system as a whole, for sure. I think we've tried to take some steps to simplify the profession system in Midnight, but I think we have a lot more work to do there, and that's something that I would expect to see continue into Last Titan and beyond. We want to strike a balance between having enough depth and complexity for players who really want to go down that rabbit hole and have being a crafter as part of their identity in WoW. But we also don't want it to feel so intimidating that if you just want to, pick some flowers and make potions for your raid, you feel like, you need to go read a guide to understand how to do that correctly. But in the case of this particular reset, I think a lot of it gets back to our goals for the profession overhaul when we first rolled it out in Dragonflight and War Within. Really was to get to a place where profession could feel like a part of your identity and where there was once again differentiation. I think that in the very early days of WoW, like 20 years ago, going back to Vanilla Burning Crusade days, leveling up professions was very costly, but there were also some very, very rare drops that were hard to obtain that ended up being like the main way people could differentiate themselves from each other. You could be the person on your server who had this enchant or who could make, these gloves or this sword or whatever. Nowadays, I think randomness is not a super satisfying way to distribute those outcomes. So, we want to let players make choices into what they want to specialize in, but we want to make sure that we're not sliding back into, I think, where professions were 10 years ago or so, where it felt like everyone can make everything. All you're doing is just finding any blacksmith, any enchanter, they click combine, the end. We want more depth than that. And so, just trying to make sure players still have some sense of flexibility, some way to fix perceived mistakes, but that we're not, eliminating identity and differentiation.
Yeah, 100%. No, I would completely agree with you. And it is something that I've seen other MMOs do really, really well, and I definitely think that will help kind of along the way with that. But one of the other things that obviously is huge for people that maybe prefer to play single player are the delves and stuff, right? So can you chat to me a little bit about how Midnight's delves have landed, how all that type of thing is working, how are people engaging with that solo content? Obviously, everybody goes massively multiplayer, so everybody goes multiplayer. Yeah. But how are those systems kind of working, and with 12.1 as well?
I think Delves and War Within and carried on into Midnight, I think, are one of the best additions to World of Warcraft ever, in my view. And I've heard a wide range of feedback around this. I think that while of course World of Warcraft is a massively multiplayer online game, honestly, the desire to play alone together, to play solo in a world that is full and of people and is vibrant, is not a new thing. In fact, I think going back to 2004, one of WoW's original strengths and claims to fame was that you could solo all the way to max level. Whereas in other MMOs at the time, if you wanted to play like EverQuest, Final Fantasy XI, whatever, if you wanted to play past the first couple of hours, if you didn't find a group, you basically couldn't do anything on your own. And so it's like, this isn't a new thing, and it doesn't cut against or undermine the MMO experience. As I mentioned earlier, there are tons of players who prefer to play on their own schedules, to play alone, or to play with, a close friend or a family member. And for years, it used to feel like you could do that up to a point. And then once you hit max level, once you reach the end game, you might have finished, the campaign and the end game story. And then you either could join a dungeon group or a raid, or you could basically stop playing WoW, or you could start leveling alts. And those are your only options. And I think, Delves and a renewed focus on solo content, outdoor world content via the praise system in Midnight, I think has really, just given a whole new perspective and a new set of goals and depth for a group of players that's a very large group of players. And I think they're a silent, if not majority, maybe plurality. Like, there haven't really been a ton of major streamers and content creators over the years who are advocating for the needs and the perspectives of people who prefer to play solo. And so without, focus on the data and seeing how many of them there actually are out there, it could be easy to overlook their perspective. And I think, I know that when we first announced Delves, there was a lot of skepticism from the loudest voices in the community that already have clear established homes in the end game, doing PvP, doing Mythic Plus, doing raids, of like, I don't know, who needs this? This is like scenarios 2.0. No one did those. No one will do this. And then, lo and behold, there's this huge group out there for whom this was just a huge boon. And so we're really excited to have continued to refine and evolve our approach to making Delves. I think, it was a novel format in War Within. Since then, we've established a dedicated Delves team that's a cross-disciplinary team that pulls from some quest design, some encounter design, some systems design backgrounds. Because when we made the system for War Within, we didn't necessarily take it as a given that it was going to be an evergreen system that would last forever. If players genuinely hadn't liked it, then we would have said, okay, this was an experiment we tried in War Within. We'll learn from it and go on to do something else. Clearly, it was successful, and it's something that we're really doubling down on and committing to going forward. And so, just learning more about what players like and don't in the experiences, adding more variety, having no more underwater sections, things, just basic learnings like that. But we're always going to continue, as we have with dungeons, as we have with other parts of the game, to evolve and iterate based on a mix of what we're hearing from our players and our own inspiration and creativity.
No more underwaters. I'm not going to say it's like a good thing, but I'm kind of hinting it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're not alone in that.
But yeah, obviously the other thing is price system, right? So there are a couple of changes coming in. I don't have the patch in front of me, but there are a couple of things that are changing with that coming into this one as well. So can you talk me through, first of all, how that's landed, and how, like you say, how we're going to be changing up a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's not really a massive overhaul. It's expanding. It's a new set of hunts, a new location, some new modifiers, new variables that you'll experience in the course of it, and a lot more fun interactions with Astalor. Was been the surprise hit of the Prey ecosystem.
I like that you said surprise hit, to be fair. That is interesting. That is interesting. But one of the other things, obviously, is that there have been a few changes to the UI with Midnight. That was one of the big things, obviously. Yes. That was a big discussion point.
Yeah.
With not the attempt to completely eliminate add-ons, but obviously to create a UI that kind of combined a lot of that type of stuff and put it in one place for Blizzard, right?
Yeah.
So you're still tweaking it up a little bit. Can you chat to me if you feel like it's in a good state? Do you think there's a bit more work to be done there? And do you think it is mitigating some of the, the need for, not the full need for add-ons, but is it doing what you wanted it to do, basically?
So I know this may be a controversial statement, but I will say that overall it has been successful so far. It's not done. It's not perfect. There's more work to go, and we are continuing to undertake that work. But I think that by and large, the vast majority of people are completing the same levels of content that they were before. They're far more are doing it without feeling like they need to seek out external tools. Now, that's not been. There have been some exceptions to that. There have been places where, the community has been able to figure out ways of making some computational logic work, and we didn't want to keep breaking things in the middle of a patch, forcing people to relearn stuff, forcing people to keep updating their add-ons. I will say that the upcoming 12.1 update has what we think is a more comprehensive overhaul of the security backend of our add-on interface in ways that should make it a bit easier for add-on authors to write add-ons, but also that close some of the loopholes that we've seen pop up here and there. Alongside that, we're also continuing to improve our base user interface, whether it's adding things like trinkets and other class racial or rate racials to the cooldown manager, looking at incorporating set bonuses in there as well, continuing to improve raid frames, and in the future we want to work towards giving players more ability to filter and emphasize different abilities in the way that in the past boss mods and raid frame mods could do for you. But by and large, all of this has been in service of a more approachable experience and a more level playing field. And I think it's as players, there was a lot of initial reactions. It was a challenging concept to explain in some ways. Where in the lead up to Midnight, many players took it as Blizzard is killing add-ons. They're getting rid of all add-ons, and that led to an understandable very negative reaction around that idea, because add-ons have been a part of WoW for 20 years. And we're looking forward to them continuing to be a part of WoW for many, many years to come. And I think we've seen, and huge kudos and credit to our add-on developer community for, kind of rolling with this and adapting and updating add-ons to continue to deliver core functionality in ways that work within the new framework. But I think we've seen a wide range of the usual add-ons, quality of life things that help you in outdoor world questing and navigation, all the cosmetic overhauls, all the things that let you customize where you want and how you want information to be displayed, while closing off those doors that were giving you access to more information that was not available to players using the base game. And I think that, that gap, as it narrows and narrows, I think in the long run is in everyone's interests. I think it allows us to design encounters, to design classes, to tune the game with a more consistent target and a more consistent player experience across the board, instead of having to always account for this set of haves versus have-nots, depending on, the power of the add-ons you have access to.
Yeah, certainly, like when I first started playing WoW, for me, the add-on system was like terrifying. I'm not a modder, I don't do any of that. I just want to click go and then go. And it's certainly, I feel, as somebody, like I say, who's not super well versed in add-ons, that all of this has certainly helped a bit. But obviously, like you say, this community has existed for 20 years, right? And obviously you've been a part of it for a while as well. So how do you kind of go about balancing community feedback for all of these things that obviously we've chatted about, while simultaneously making a game? Do you know what I mean?
Ultimately trying to listen as much as possible, absorb the feedback, but also keep an eye on what we see as the essential components of the long-term health of the game. A change like this, I think, is always very challenging to make. And when I say this, I mean the add-on revamp that was done in Midnight. The easiest things to work on are just, we're going to add shiny new toys. We're going to add new content. We're going to add new rewards. That generally makes, no one angry. It makes people either happy if it's for them, or if the content is not their cup of tea, they can just ignore it and continue to go about their ways. But there are times over the years, whether it's, streamlining classes, whether it's reining in complexity or removing systems, or doing what we did here, where we need to, take an eye towards the long-term health and sustainability of the game, both for the developers and, more importantly, for the millions of players. We can't just keep adding and adding and adding and adding for, year after year, or eventually we're going to have systems that just collapse under their own weight. And I think, the change to add-ons is something we've been contemplating for a while. We always knew that it came with risks. Anytime you're asking players to relearn something that's familiar, anytime you're taking away a tool that people have relied on or used for years, I don't expect people to love that. I don't expect people to say, oh my God, this is so exciting. I can't wait to get in and experience this without the damage meter add-on I used to use or whatever. Like, that's not, but at the same time, it's important for us to do, or the game would have continued down a path of increasing bifurcation, increasing like weaponization of add-ons in a way that we couldn't ignore. I think the things that we had been seeing add-ons do in recent years were just going far above and beyond what we had seen, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, when we kind of accepted that, oh yeah, these are like convenient and they help solve problems for you in some ways, but they don't feel like they're undermining the spirit of the game. Versus, full credit to a very sophisticated community, but increasingly, players have been looking for ways to solve in real time the different challenges that we were throwing at players. And that was not leading, I think, the game's encounter and class design down a good path. As people often, in the community, was often speculated or imagined that mechanics were designed with the intent that add-ons would be used to solve them. That's never the case. But what certainly increasingly happened was designing around the add-ons, like understanding like, hey, if we do it this way, this might be simpler, but someone's going to write an add-on. There'll be a week or a day two that completely solves this mechanic and basically removes it from the fight. So we have to add an extra layer of complexity. We have to redesign it. We have to do something different in order to mitigate that risk. And that's the arms race that we were referring to here. And I think while it's, certainly been a transition with its challenges, we are excited to have this new baseline, this new foundation, and things will only continue to get better from here, both as we continue to add functionality to the base UI, as we continue to empower add-on authors to provide customization options, and as we, frankly, internally relearn some aspects of how we can build encounters now in this new world. And I think that's going to open up new doors and new possibilities for players in raids, in dungeons, in delves, and everywhere in between.
Yeah, and I think it's really, I'm going to just jump on the end of that where you said all the ideas of, new encounters and these type of things, because at the end of the day, right, World of Warcraft is a game that is older than a lot of people, right? When we put it like that, it's kind of terrifying, right? And how, with, obviously we've got the World Soul Saga, they all kind of intertwine together, and this is a different look for WoW, it's a faster pace, it's a lot of these different types of things. So how, when a game is this old, has this much content, has this much community behind it, this much love behind it, how do you continue to innovate, right? Because the MMO genre continues to expand. WoW is still the premier MMO, but how do you continue to do things? How do you do things like Delves? How do you do things like Prey? How do you continue to keep innovating?
I mean, a lot of it just goes back to our core design philosophies and principles of asking, what is a player fantasy? What is the fiction that we can build the design around to harmoniously deliver and fulfill? It's listening to players and looking at data to understand gaps, understand problems and opportunities. I think that our players are better than anyone in the world at telling us when they're not having fun. And that's a thing that, is fun is subjective. A player's individual experience is objective. If they're not enjoying something and they're telling us that, we have to listen and we have to work to understand why. And so, I think most of the new features that come to WoW are not necessarily things that were directly suggested by the community, but they're things that we've identified as fulfilling a need that will and better serving a group of our community that were previously underserved. And I think that really is the genesis of features like Delves and Prey. No one was specifically asking for Delves in that exact form, but it nonetheless has connected with an audience that was previously very underserved by what we were building.
I had a follow-up question. It just went straight out of my brain. That's really annoying, and it's not on my sheet next to me. Oh, okay, it'll come back. Will it come back? Yes, it will. No, it didn't. It's gone again. So I will come back to that question when I remember what that question was. But it's going to really, really annoy me. But yes. So one of the things that, okay, I'm back. I got it. So Midnight, I think, took a lot of, I think the World Soul Saga bluntly has taken a lot of really big swings generally. Maybe more than we saw in the likes of Shadowlands, Dragonflight, that definitely felt like a WoW expansion, but didn't feel to me always like they added a bunch of new cool things to do. So for me, I would have argued that Midnight specifically takes a lot of really big swings. So I don't like the term risk, because risk implies that there's a bad thing. But it feels like, as a team, you guys are taking more risks. You guys are taking bigger swings. So what is the kind of philosophy behind that? And is that something you agree with? Can we expect more of these kind of unexpected things going forward?
I mean, hopefully, yes, right? It's always a balance to strike between, subverting expectations, or at times, if you've done a good job of foreshadowing in telling a story, players will criticize the thing that comes next. It's like, well, that was so predictable. And it's like, well, it's predictable because we've been building towards it. And arguably, if we did something wildly different, it would seem out of character, or it would seem like we were, contravening the direction we've been heading in. But yeah, something I worry about a lot personally, and I know that the team talks about a lot, is as we iterate on WoW, as we tell new stories, go to new locations, we want to be wary of ever falling into the trap of being too formulaic. And with people who've been on this journey with us for as long as many have, that's for sure a risk. And so, we're looking at new settings, but also new structures and ways of telling the story. Some will be more character focused and following an individual's journey and struggle, like the Anduin's arc, for example, as won over the course of War Within. Whereas others are more about a culture. And I think what we're going to be diving into in our next content update really is digging deep into troll culture, the origins of the Amani, the long and fraught relationship between them and the neighboring elves, and the ties that bind all of them together. There isn't necessarily a single character that's going to be central to that, but it's going to be more about the land and the people. So, in all things, we look to learn, look to vary our approach. But yeah, it's, we just keep evolving based on what we hear from our players and our own ideas.
So I'm really glad you touched on trolls, right? Because there are some things in life that are certain, like death, taxes, and trolls, right? It does feel like we will always see them, but I'm so glad that they're back. I'm a big Zandalari troll person. I really like Zandalari trolls for real.
Cool.
So talk to me, trolls. Why are we back here? Why are we doing the trolls again? What's this all about? In the best way positive, like the most positive way possible.
Sure. No, because there's an untold story this is something that's obviously been hinted at since players first met Zuljara and Zul'Jan and were questing through Zul'Aman, the level up arc of Midnight. But the trolls are an ancient and essential part of these lands, and their history is complex and is also going to touch on some dark relics and artifacts and things that do tie this back to the overarching story of Midnight and what Xal'atath is up to and how we're going to, get back to where she is and catch up with her to try to stop her and her ultimate aims. So it can seem like a little bit of a side story initially, but I think without giving away too many spoilers, as the events unfold, it very clearly is a continuation of the overall arc of Midnight. But yeah, I think when we decided that we were going to be returning to these lands, the primary occupants historically are the Blood Elves and the Amani Trolls. And so we've learned a lot. We've really delved deeply into the history of the Blood Elves, their internal relationships, the family, the history of the Sunwell, all of that. We haven't had the same deep focus on trolls, their problems, their villains, and that's about to happen. So excited to get there.
Yeah, I'm very okay with that. One Sandy is probably like one of my favorite WoW characters, and I know that he's not very nice, right? We're keeping this PG-13 here. I know he's not very nice, but I love him. I still love him. He's got vibes. He's got vibes. He's a mood. But I've got 2 questions left. Obviously, I think that WoW right now feels like, for me, if I take, obviously, the conversation about bugs aside, because I'm not going to sit and dwell on that, I think WoW feels like it's in a really, really cool state just now. Is that something that you would agree with?
I'm biased, but I certainly think so. I'm just incredibly proud of the work the team has done, and I think that, modern World of Warcraft, in the years especially since Dragonflight, has been focusing on, really a player-first approach to the game, on meeting our players where they are in the wide diversity of their play styles, their preferences, their approaches to the game, and trying to serve each of those as best we can, while also, bringing them together and fostering interconnection as part of this massively multiplayer world.
Yeah, and that perfectly kind of leads me into my last question, which is my big swing question that I told you right at the start. Spoiler alert. But obviously you've been working on this game a while, like a little while.
Coming up on 18 years. Yeah, it's been a minute.
So you have seen WoW in so many different iterations and so many different places and so many different times. Why should someone play World of Warcraft in 2026?
I think, well, first off is the question of which flavor of World of Warcraft do you want to play, which I think is a whole exciting conversation. We've been talking about Midnight, but lest we forget, we also have the classic game there, so you can revisit where it all began. And I think that fits into the broader message, as I was just saying, of really trying to meet players where they are, of recognizing that over the course of 20 years, if we've learned anything from our players, it's that they are, in many ways, diverse and different from each other in what they want. They have different play styles, different preferences, and yet this shared desire to visit Azeroth, to spend their time immersed in this world, living these stories amongst each other. And I think we've been learning for 20 years and refining our ability to serve our players, to tell stories, to offer depth, to offer meaningful rewards, and to offer increasingly flexibility. World of Warcraft used to be known as a game that would consume your life, and a game that if you didn't have tons and tons and tons of time to play, you shouldn't even bother picking up because it required tons and tons of time to get anything out of it. World of Warcraft today in 2026 is still a game that you absolutely will give you as much as you put into it, and that you can sink a ton of time into if you're looking to really go deep and immerse yourself in a game. It's also a game where you can log in for 20 minutes, after lunch or whatever, and accomplish something meaningful. It's a game where you can play it solo. It's a game where you can play it with a large group of friends. We haven't moved away from what we used to be into something new. We have broadened and expanded our focus. And so it's all of those things and more. And so with, an epic story going on, with an updated new player experience to get players up to speed on recent events and get them jumped right into the latest content that everyone is playing, with this wide variety of ways to adventure, progress, collect, decorate, roleplay, fight in PvP, and so forth. I think there's something for everyone in WoW today. And, again, I'm biased, but I think there couldn't be a better time than now to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those that it's really interesting when I do World of Warcraft stuff because, full transparency, I'm 29, almost 30. We don't talk about that bit. And our editor has been playing World of Warcraft for 20 years, right? Or whatever that is. It's about, I think he was raiding back in the day, right? And he has all of those memories. And then I join a bit later on because it's a little bit of an age gap. I join in a lot later on, and it still feels like such a weird connective experience for two players that played at different times of life, completely two different human beings, and it's a world that just unites people, and I think that is what's so exciting about it.